Scientists by the expedition full roam the lake, the big push to find conclusive evidence that huge creatures live in Loch Ness.
Long neck, smallish head, and a huge hump body, which I reckon was 30 feet long.
I've really got to get this photo. I feel that I'm the one that's going to get it.
It was just interesting, and we didn't make money out of it or anything.
Loch Ness is a magnet for monsters, myths, and madmen.
We feel so strongly with regard to the reality of what we have that we think is the 10th wonder of the world, if you will.
Do you believe it?
I am totally convinced that the people with the latest investigation are honest and serious-minded men.
So the next film we're going to review is Loch Ness, They Created a Monster, a documentary by John MacLaverty, and it's a very archive-rich documentary focusing on the search for the Loch Ness Monster, and I think like kind of the frenzy around that in the 70s and 80s, which honestly I've always heard, I think we've always heard of the Loch Ness Monster, and especially some people who live in Scotland or from Scotland, you know, it's quite a tourist attraction, but back then it was quite a hunt, and there was a lot of so the film really focuses on the hunters, the people, you know, trying to find, and the eccentricities of that story versus the actual Loch Ness Monster, and you know whether or not those were true. But I mean, they had some quite serious people who were talking about it very seriously. Like you had Leonard Nimoy do a stand-up, you know, intro to a show. You had David Attenborough, you know, like in this archive. So it brings a lot of so sort of like the whole craze of it and the history that I didn't know about. Just always, I actually never been to Loch Ness, but you know, was fascinating. It's my kind of film in that way. I think they're. I'll talk a little bit about maybe my reservations on the film, but overall, you know, it was an enjoyable watch. Gary, what did you think?
I thought it was a lot of fun. And you'll know more about documentary filmmaking than me. I don't tend to watch that many documentaries. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I think, like say, I'm Scottish, grown up in Scotland, so obviously very aware of the sort of tourist aspect around Nessie. But it was actually quite a surprise to me. I didn't realise that people were so seriously hunting back in the 60s and 70s. So I found it quite informative as well. It's quite interesting seeing these different efforts, like the London-based guy Frank Searle, who kind of lived on the shores of Loch Ness on the banks of Loch Ness for like 20 years, and he became kind of part of the tourist attraction itself, where people would go to see the loch, but also to see his caravan, and so that's like a really kind of creepy, but kind of like a fun, like amazing story within a story in this documentary. Quite liked how they kind of dropped in parts with him throughout it, but I thought it was well made, and I was surprised to see like you say, David Attenborough turn up, Michael Parkinson. There was like some recognizable faces talking about it, and I think it also does a good job of like looking at Loch Ness and the Loch Ness Monster from different angles, so you get the kind of the hunter aspect, which the film is kind of largely focused on, but then there's also some sections around like the tourism, like the bus tours, and then like the merchandise and this consumerism aspects around it. And I was amazed to read that it brings in, I think it was £50 million per year tourism in and around the Loch Ness Monster. So I had fun with it. What were your reservations around it, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a huge fan of archive film, and I really got into the archive aspects of it there were parts of this drone footage, and I think and the kind of bus, where the tourist bus and stuff like that, that really pulled me away from kind of maybe the now was pulling me away a little bit from the then, and in a way that I didn't think was necessary or as polished. And I think the story was quite lovely from the archive side, I guess, as was my thought. And I think there could have been a little bit less of that sort of typical drone shot that I would normally. I just sort of attune that to. I mean, honestly, I have a drone, and I love drone shots, but I think sometimes I see that and I think of a Netflix, like true crime film or something like that. So, and maybe the reenactment of the Frank character as well. But I made me think a lot about why people do these things. And I thought, again, 70s and 80s is a little early for me, but in the 90s and with the Titanic and whatnot, I feel like there's kind of a similar sort of frenzy around that. And when we kind of people from all over the world, and I thought that was what was really interesting, is as someone who didn't grow up in Scotland but now lives in Scotland, knew of Loch Ness and in some aspects this romanticism of wanting to believe, and whether or not the people dedicating their lives to the banks of a just to search for it is fascinating, and why people do that. I think in similar situation with the Titanic, you look at, I love to give James Cameron a bad rap, but like he made a film because he was obsessed with it, like he wanted to go down there. But anyway, I just I think there's something really interesting about why people do these things. I don't think the film is about believing or not. I think you have to be romantic, I suppose, to believe it, but it's more about the why people do what they do, and why people did this at this time, and why we get so excited around it, and why there still is this tourist fascination with it. So it made me appreciate it more. Maybe I will go to Loch Ness and look for it. I guess it was just that I didn't necessarily need to see all kind of that modern day stuff as much as I liked the archive based part of the story.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. I think it does kind of take you out the film a little bit, and I do think that the sort of 60s and 70s, 80s, these mostly men, but there's a women in Belgium as well, who had a fascination with finding the monster or getting footage of the monster. But I do think that I mentioned them earlier, but to mention Frank Serral again, I feel like there could be a film solely about which would be interesting to see. But I think that people who are already interested in Loch Ness monster will enjoy this film, and people who aren't might. It won't harm the Loch Ness tourist industry with this film doing the rounds. So hope people go and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did play at the Inverness Film Festival. Just a shout out for the Inverness Film Festival, and I think it won the second audience award. First being Tish, which we just showed. A shout out to Tish because it's currently out in cinemas right now. Around the photographer Tish Murtha, so check that out if you can. But it's doing well. Where Loch Ness, they created monsters, it's very popular with audiences. So I think it's a fun watch. It's not it's not a challenging watch. So if you wanna learn a little bit more about the Loch Ness frenzy, go watch it.